running for me is as much about how it makes me feel psychologically and mentally as it is the physical benefits that come from it. And also it's been my ticket around the world. I've gotten to travel to a lot of amazing places to run these races. So if you've been thinking about a marathon or considering it for years, take this as your sign. Go ahead and pick one and sign up and commit.
Yay Networks.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter and they really help us. One of the things I love best about hosting this podcast, our Fueled Wellness and Nutrition podcast, is that I'm continually learning, having conversations with experts on different topics in different areas and hearing their research, their experiences, what works for them, and learning things that we can take away from that ourselves. We can find that inspiration, that education, and a lot of times it just gives us that little extra edge or that extra little nudge to try something new. So this week, I'm really excited to share with y'all marathon fueling. And you may be like, wait a second, Molly, I'm not down for training for a marathon just yet, but hear us out. So you could be training for a full marathon, the 26 miles. You could be doing a half marathon, 13, or you can even hear what we're talking about today in fueling and really apply it to any type of longer or endurance exercise or even shorter endurance. And what I'll say, part of the reason we wanted to do this podcast now is we have the New York City Marathon coming up right around the corner. Also, we would say, yeah, of course, that's too soon to get ready for that. And there's a whole bunch of other things that even go into doing that marathon. Of course, it's too late to do that one if you weren't already planning for it. But now is the time to start preparing. If you've had that seed of an idea, like maybe I want to do a marathon, there's a lot of spring marathons on the horizon. So now is a really perfect time to start thinking about how you're going to start training, how you're going to start fueling your body. So to help talk through this with me and kind of share from her perspective, I am joined by one of my favorite wellness writers, Caitlin Carlson. I've done a lot of interviews with Caitlin over the years where usually she is interviewing me about a topic. So Caitlin, welcome. I'm excited to finally have you.
So excited to be here, Molly. And what a great topic.
It's also one I know it's the same with you. You're interviewing a lot of different experts on wellness that you're going to be featuring in different content that you're writing and creating. Same for me. I work with a lot of different writers who may be asking, hey, can we do an interview on this topic? I remember the very first interview you and I ever did. It was immediately I was talking to you as if I had known you forever.
Totally. No, it's so true. And it continues to be that way. Sometimes,
yeah,
experts, you just hit it off.
Yeah. And
like-minded people and all that.
So much. And so we had the opportunity to get together in person just a couple of months ago. You live in Manhattan and we were there in August. And so got to meet in person. So I was really happy about that. And so why Caitlin? Why did I ask Caitlin to join me for this? So I guess tell us yourself, because you're a writer, you've covered marathon fueling and performance for years, but you've also competed in a whole bunch of them.
Yes, exactly. So I started my career, technically at Women's Health magazine back in around 2011. But prior to that, I interned at Runner's World magazine in London, where I got my master's degree in journalism. And then even at Women's Health, I kind of naturally fell into the fitness space, kind of gravitated there more than nutrition and some of the other topics that they covered. From there, I went to Shape magazine. I was at Men's Fitness for a while. And then I was a deputy editor at Equinox's digital magazine called Furthermore. And in all of these places, I covered running quite a bit. And as you mentioned, also, I have done a lot of running myself. I've run 10 marathons in total, including the 6 world marathon majors. So that's London, Chicago, New York, Boston, Berlin, and Tokyo.
You've done all of those.
I've done all of those. Over the course of about 3 years, it took me to tick them all off. Honestly, the travel component was, just kind of the best part, I would say, even more so than kind of the physicality of the marathon running and that accomplishment.
Are there 6 majors in total, or are there more?
And that's it. So there's been talk that there's potential to add a 7th. I don't know if and when that will happen. But right now, those are the ones that have been deemed the majors.
When you did the first one, did you set out to say, okay, I want to do all six? Was that sort of like an intention?
It kind of turned into it was kind of accidental, I guess I would say. I was supposed to run the New York City Marathon the year that Sandy hit New York City, and it ended up being canceled. So I had a friend in London from Runner's World that said, "Come run London in April and kind of, make up for having missed out on New York." And when I went to London, they had kind of signage everywhere for these world marathon majors. And I was super intrigued. Like, what is this? Did a little investigating. Turned out London and New York are both majors. And I had a deferred entry to New York for the following November. So I'm like, wow, I already have 2 out of 6
Right.
pretty much banked. How do I get these other 4? Um, some of them came easier than others, and Tokyo was one that I thought I would just like to do it in my lifetime. Didn't think I would be able to tick it off right away. But I had a good friend who really wanted to go to Japan, really encouraged me to kind of get all the details sorted out. And I went with 3 of my best girlfriends
Oh, that's
to
so
Tokyo for
cool.
a week and a half, and it was incredible. And was able to check off that last marathon.
How did you get into running? Was it something that you did through college? Is it something you grew up as a runner? Because I remember the first time that I tried to run a mile. It was like, I remember, and I was young. I was 15, 16. I thought I was not going to be able, it was like around the block and I didn't think I could make it back home. And it wasn't even that far.
I had a similar experience actually. I was on the cheerleading team in college for a couple years at Fordham University in the Bronx in New York. And as part of our practice, we ran a mile around the track in the gym. And I could
So you
not
had like
do
people, you
it
had
to save my
spectators,
life.
like other people with you.
Exactly.
Yes.
And everybody else could do it like it was no problem. And it was like I would always I would get like 3 laps around and then just like have to walk the last lap. And there was one other girl that sometimes would kind of fall back with me, but I was determined to be able to run a mile. So
Yes.
I worked really hard. I had a good friend and roommate at the time. We would just go, try to run laps around the track together. Finally was able to do it. And then they said, well, next year it's going to be 2 miles.
How long did it take you to get to where you could do a mile without stopping?
In my mind, it like took me like forever, but probably a couple months
Yeah.
realistically
Yeah.
of just doing it, like, repetition
Yeah.
and just really practice and determination. And then getting to 2 miles, it took me like a summer. It was like my summer project, like having the summer off from college. And I did it in a gym. I remember I like ran on a treadmill and I hit the 2 mile mark, and then I like went and laid under a fan in the locker room afterwards.
Your
Um,
cheeks are like bright red. You're like overheated, but you're like, I did it. And I think it's
exactly.
so
For
good to
real
hear
though.
that because you've done 10 marathons. You're 34. I'm 47. I've done one marathon and multiple half marathons and different types of other like types of endurance events. And so for me, running was always something that I did, or a lot of people who know me as an adult would know I don't run now because of like hip injuries, which actually was more overuse injuries, which is a whole separate topic. So I do more walking now, which actually still brings me a lot of pleasure and joy. I wouldn't have thought that as a runner that walking would be satisfying, but it really is. But I think that someone would see me running and they would never know, nor would they know this about you, just how hard those first miles are. And it's really just setting your mind. I really remember being where I was in the neighborhood and I thought, I'm sitting on the ground here and I don't think I can get back home. Like I'm going to have to ask like a neighbor for help. It was so challenging. I joined the cross country team and I knew that I had this summer to try to get to where I could like somewhat keep up. But Caitlin, here's what we did. Like I got really into running where I enjoyed it more, even in college and high school. Joining the cross country team was sort of like, I don't have another option. I have to get myself like acclimated to this. We would
Yeah.
tuck. So it was that I went to a high school that we lived near these beautiful lakes near the LSU lakes in Baton Rouge. And our cross country team would go running around the lakes. And there was a certain route we were supposed to do. But my friend and we would like tuck money like in our socks and we would go to the frozen yogurt shop, like right down the street. And we would go the way with everyone and then we sort of cut off. Not every time. I mean, we did
That's
do a
amazing.
lot of the runs, but there was other days that we would just do that. And then we would come back and she would know, our coach would know. And we would be like, how can she tell we didn't do it? Obviously, she could tell we had not just run 6 miles or whatever we were supposed to run that day. Like clearly we had not, you know. But as a
That's
kid, you're
hilarious.
thinking, God, how does she know this? You know? Yes.
Right.
So it
No, you're
evolved
so sneaky.
much past that. So anyone who's listening and is like, I really struggle with that. It's trying to get your wind. It's trying to get your pace. It's trying to kind of find that rhythm. Just know, like hearing Caitlin, who's done 10 marathons, 6 world marathon majors, it's possible, you know, and everyone truly is starting somewhere. And we all remember those moments and also those cringing, embarrassing moments because we think maybe we were younger and you think, well, that's easy. And then you're like, wow, not.
No, it's so true. And like I really do like I love that like talking about this experience that I had because I think you're right. I think a lot of people just assume that like you're either a runner or you're not. I've had a lot of people say to me like, "Oh, I could never run a marathon." And for me, it's like you can. If you're like a reasonably healthy person, you absolutely can with some training. If you don't want to because it's not your thing and you'd rather like do other types of exercise, like totally cool. But I always want people to know like you really can. It's totally doable and like I'm saying that from someone who I could not run a mile. It took me months to be able to work up to where I could run a mile without stopping.
And
So
we'll also say your pace is moderate. Like you have a moderate and impressive pace, but you're not, you know, winning like the awards. You're not in it to compete with other people. You're doing it for your own personal satisfaction.
totally. It's funny because my dad has come to watch me in multiple marathons, and he always jokes with me that he's like, "I'm going to stop coming. You never win." He's like, he's like every time you lose. But you know, I my pace is my best marathon time is I think around 3:55, so just under 4 hours, which was my goal. So I think respectable, but certainly not like super competitive.
Right.
I really it's more of a hobby for me,
Right.
and that kind of thing.
And setting
So
those personal goals. And then, you know, I would imagine each time you're like, okay, if you were to do another, you might try to like, you know, beat your best time with each race, like, okay, based on the conditions or climate and such.
exactly.
We're going to talk fueling, of course, and we're going to talk, you know, nutrition around it. But just out of curiosity, which has been your favorite marathon in terms of the city or the route or just everything around it?
So my favorite marathon experience was Chicago, and which is Chicago is a great city, but like made me kind of surprising based
Yeah.
on all the other cities. It was
Berlin,
just one of
Tokyo.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, and I also ran one in Paris, which is not a major,
Yeah.
but was another one. But the day in Chicago, it was just one of those like it was perfect weather. I really like the way that the race is run. There's like no pomp and circumstance. Well, very little pomp and circumstance at the start. You just kind of like walk up and start running versus like New York City, you have to take like a ferry or a bus and go to Staten Island and sit in a cold field for like 3 hours before you start. And it's all worth it. But Chicago was like just a
Roll up
lot
and go.
more chill. Yeah. And it was just a really great day and good memories. And that was actually my marathon PR was in that race. But the in terms of just like travel experiences in cities, like definitely going to Japan and seeing Tokyo was like just incredible. And it wasn't like in the top probably 5 places in the world that I wanted to go. I like mainly went to run this race, and now I want to go back and see more of the country and of Tokyo. And yeah, it was life changing for sure.
And running through a place like that, I would imagine there's parts of the rate, like parts of running the 26.2 miles that like the time has passed so much because there's so much around you that's so stimulating to take
Yes,
in and look at because it just keeps
absolutely.
going in a place like Tokyo.
All marathons kind of feel like that. Like long runs for me, not so much. Like a 20-mile long run feels like a 3 hour endeavor, like a 20-mile long run. But there's something about like race day. It's like all of these major marathons too have big crowds, and that like
Yeah.
really helps. So even if you're
Yeah.
not going to run a major, but you want to run a marathon, I would say for your first one, look for one that's like in a big city or kind of encourages big crowds because it
Yes.
helps so much with the energy. Yeah, I mean it absolutely every single one. It's like obviously it's hard. You struggle. There's ups, there's downs, but overall, I think every time I'm kind of like surprised that I'm at the finish line
Right. Right.
because it does go by quickly.
Talk to me about how you're fueling, because you're right. It's a lot. You're pushing your body to these limits that are, really unnatural for us to go. Most of us are just not. It's not something that, like we said, it was hard for us to run half a mile or even a mile when we started. So the fact that you're asking your body to perform, to run for 26.2 miles, almost 4 hours of time that you're doing this, how are you fueling? So let's talk about kind of like what it looks like. Let's start first, maybe actually even like during that window. I know, so for our listeners, when we talk about like fueling for something like a long event, like a marathon, we're going to be talking about what to eat before. And by before, we might mean morning of, night before, the week of, the week before. And then there's during, and then there's after for recovery. But since we're kind of talking about the experience of actually running that race and kind of putting our bodies, not putting it through that, but sort of, let's talk about like what your choices are and how you choose to fuel your body during that race.
Sure. So for me personally, usually if it's less than 8 or 9 miles, I won't bring anything.
So a training
Ideally, you have
run,
some a
a
training
training,
run.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Ideally, you have some water, but anything over 9 miles, and then of course on marathon on race day, I usually go with just like the good old fashioned like goo, like the capital G U, like
Mm-hmm.
little energy gels.
Mm-hmm.
They're not the cleanest, and I've seen now, like as still a fitness writer, lots of innovative products in the space, and like a couple brands that come to mind. Bring Energy is one that I saw recently. So I'm interested in kind of looking into those alternative options, but up to this point, I've really kind of stuck with the good old fashioned goo gels, and making sure you have water when you take them. But yeah, would love to experiment a little bit more.
Goo always, it's been, as I mentioned, a little while since I've run or done a marathon, but Goo it was sort of one of the first ones that came to market. And so I think it's kind of one of those that's like, it's just that go to for a lot of people. Like you said, there's
Yeah,
a lot of new brands that have come out. So by any means, what we'll talk about is Goo. And again, it's GU, like Caitlin said. It's essentially like a carbohydrate gel in a little pouch. And I remember like training for a race, like if you had like the vanilla or the chocolate, you were like really, you would feel depleted. And then it was almost like such a luxurious treat to have this goo. It was like, and I would
yeah,
like tell, he was my boyfriend then, husband and now, like, I was like, no, try this. It is like vanilla icing. It is like chocolate icing. This is like really, and he was like, Molly, this is horrible. But like in the moment when you're out there, like it is like feels really decadent. So for someone who's like, that seems weird, like squeezing a carbohydrate gel out of a pouch, it is. We acknowledge it. But there's different flavors. There's sweet, there's salty, there's different ones. One thing that I'll say about them, they have about, 20, 25 grams of carbs each. They're mostly like maltodextrin and essentially sugars and these quickly digested, quickly utilized sugars. The sodium in them is relatively low, only about 60 milligrams. Did you add
interesting.
another salt source?
I didn't actually, no, but maybe I should be.
Did you put any, what would you drink during yours?
Just straight water usually.
Oh, Caitlin, yeah.
Maybe I have room to
Yeah.
optimize
Yeah.
here.
They have about 60. So as you were doing it, you still got some sodium. And I was looking, they have a salted caramel, a salted watermelon, and like the salted watermelon has about like 120, 125 milligrams of sodium. And so that's just something for people to think about, like as you're in the longer runs. And so you heard Caitlin say that when she said anything over about 8 or 9 miles. So the good rule of thumb is if it's going to be more than about an hour and a half of workout, of cardio, of extended cardio, that's when. And so for you, that translated to probably about that 9 mile mark.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, it may be 9 miles for you, it may not be. But if you're training, running, cycling, and it's under that 90 minutes, we really, for the most part, we don't need to supplement with those extra carbohydrates or sugars during that longer training session or event. But like she was saying, when it's that 9 miles or 90 minutes or longer, then we start looking. And something like GU is one. What are some of the others that you've seen people do along the way that you find interesting along the race route?
Sometimes courses have like interesting things. They like have like a table set up and they'll be like giving away like bananas cut in half. I've seen orange slices. I've heard people talk about certain like international marathons having like random things. I'm trying to think of an example
I
and
wonder if like Nutella or
I'm
something would
blanking.
be in any of the international ones.
But like something like that,
Yeah.
that's like a very like maybe that would be in France or
Right.
there is a marathon in France called the Marathon du Medoc, MEDOC, and it's through all of these like gorgeous vineyards. I haven't done it, but I would love to do it. And you drink wine and like eat like
No.
pastries and cakes like throughout the
No.
marathon.
Is it
And so
still
obviously you're not.
26.2 miles? Yes.
It is.
Wow.
It is. Yeah.
I wonder how many people don't finish it.
That's a good question. I know the few people that I know who have done it, it's obviously not one to be like trying to get a personal
Right.
record or anything like that. And I think there's a lot of walking and
Right.
it's more like a experience than it is to like
Yes.
the running aspect.
Yeah. People
But
probably like strategize. Okay, I'm going to run the first half of it and then we're going to walk the second half. Like in New Orleans, we have things called like the red dress runs and stuff like that. And it's men, women, all dressed up in red dresses, but it's really a drinking walk through the French Quarter. It's not really a run.
yeah,
Um, so,
right.
so part of the reason that something like goos or gels are also really easy is that they're so portable. And so you can kind of just keep them like in your pocket. You can keep them in a zipper pocket or like a little pouch just really, really easily. Things that are beyond that are sometimes harder for people to take the time, stop, open it, eat it. So I think thinking of
Yeah.
what's going to be really easy for hydration, I love, and I wonder how you would do with this because you would just do water. So you would get like water from a station or water that you carry.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I usually I train with like one of those handheld water bottles. There's like
Right.
tons of different options on the market now, like those like kind of camelback types with the straw. There's like waist packs that hold the bottles. I found that like the handheld that has the strap that goes around the hand works best for me. And I actually have run a few marathons with that. And I would just go to the aid station and like open it and a volunteer would pour the water
Right.
in there because it has like the little sipper top so it's easier than like a cup that you
Right.
get on the course. You kind of have to like stop to drink that. But other times I've just relied on what they provide.
One thing that
So
I'll encourage our listeners is when you're looking at, okay, how much fluid are you drinking? And what type of fluid are you drinking? Having water or sports drink, but on sports drinks, I love the Noon tablets, NUUN,
ooh,
and they're
yes,
very low sugar because you would be getting the sugars from the goo, so you don't need extra sugars from the sports drink. But they'll have over like 300 milligrams of sodium in them, and so
amazing.
you could then just have the little tablets that are super easy to just drop into the water bottle, like at a station that doesn't really take any extra time or slowing down. There's other products like locally here in the New Orleans area. There's a brand called My High but they're more like longer stick packs that you would kind of pour that into it. It could be a little more cumbersome. The tablets of Noon would probably be something really easy to put in there. Someone is doing a traditional sports drink like a Gatorade or Powerade. The electrolytes in that are relatively low compared to something like Noon, and the sugars are high. So I don't love, if someone's doing like a goo and a Gatorade Powerade, you're kind of getting, yeah, double sugars, but you're also not getting really much electrolytes at all. So if you did a goo and then you're hydrating with something like the Noon, that works. I have a question about when you're running with that strapped on one hand, do you change arms so it kind of keeps the weight
Yes,
distribution? I would think so.
yeah, I will. I feel like it kind of happens like organically.
Yeah.
I don't think about it.
Yeah.
I just kind of like will shift it
That
around as
fatigue.
I go.
The other thing to keep in mind, and again, just for our listeners, like when you're thinking about how often, so something like that goo or those gels are about 20, 25 grams of carbs, something like that. Or she said, like if it's the banana halves or something like that, that might be placed out there for you. If you're on your own training, you're probably not carrying bananas on your person, but like it might be along the race route. Having something like that about every 45 minutes works well for most people. And again, like, our team of dietitians or any dietitian that's a sports specific dietitian can also walk you through like your own protocol. But hydration, that's one that can be hard for people because if you're not thinking of it, you let yourself get too deep, too far in the hole. And then if you're drinking too quickly, you're going to cramp up. So did you kind of set yourself on a pace for how much fluid along the way?
Yeah, I think my rule was kind of like every other hydration station I would stop. My main thing was always drinking when I had a go. So that every 45 minutes that you mentioned was exactly what I followed. And I would always have like a full cup of water with it, just because they recommend that for helping you to digest
Right.
it. But then it also kind of forced me to like stay on top of my hydration a
Right.
little bit better.
So like looking at the actual like guidelines, like the sport specific guidelines for hydration are higher than what I'm about to say. But what I find that works well for people is aiming for at least like 4 to 6 ounces, like every 15 to 20 minutes. And that's not even what is like the full recommendation. But I'm thinking we would just be sloshing. Like if you're drinking like 8 ounces of fluid or 8 to 12 ounces every 15 minutes, that would be hard. And so setting
Yes.
yourself on a schedule, like, so for Caitlin, she would make sure that, she would have, it sounds like a cup of water every 45 minutes or looking at every other race station or however they fall. It's setting yourself on a rhythm so you don't forget, especially if you're in a climate where it's colder, you may not feel as thirsty. You may not realize you're losing as much sweat. And so making sure you kind of put yourself on a schedule and like it also can kind of break up that stretch of a run. Like if you have your like a little alarm going off every 15 minutes that reminds you to take a 4 ounce sip of your water, kind of breaks it up along the
Yeah.
way.
And I think too, like I know we're going to get into this at some point, but kind of going into the race well hydrated
Yes, yes,
and not kind of
yes.
like you said in the getting yourself in the hole. It's like it kind of starts like before you even start running.
Yeah, and so kind of like the pre-hydration. So thinking about there's other things like I've had clients tell me that they'll do things like a peanut butter sandwich and peanut butter with honey versus peanut butter with jelly because the jelly would like slip out of the bread or kind of get, like
Yeah.
it plops more whereas like the honey's going to like stick it better. And having like a little kind of a fanny pack. You called it something the other day when we talked. What do you call it?
A spy belt. It's like SPI
Okay.
belt. It's like a brand. It's like a
Okay, yeah.
little
Let like a
skinny
little
pack.
more streamlined than a fanny pack for someone.
Yes. Yes.
But in these packs, I've had clients who would tell me that they would take more than just the goose because the goose felt like, especially on something like, a longer event, they would feel like it was just so kind of like sicky sweet and they couldn't do anymore. So, a peanut butter honey kind of cut into fours and it would just be a mashed mess by the time they got to it. And so that was always a little surprising to me, but some people who preferred that real food to give them that carb and fuel there. There's also different types of like gels or almost like gummies. And so like Cliff has the little shot blocks and they're
Okay.
almost like gummies that are sort of like how the gel, like the goo is like the gel you squeeze into your mouth. The Cliff blocks are also kind of these little carbohydrate based blocks. They have a margarita that has more sodium in it. So I think just for our
Okay.
listeners,
Interesting.
like breaking it up into, okay, well, I love the sweet. I like doing the goos and doing those every 45 minutes works. And it's not a crazy long amount of time, even if it's 4 hours every 45 minutes, or breaking it up with something like the margarita, higher salt content of the Cliff Shot blocks, looking at what your hydration is. But ultimately, it's how are you going to fuel those hours with something that you can carry very easily.
Yeah, and so actually, I'm curious what your professional opinion is of this. When I was in college, I would come in to Central Park to run on Wednesdays for a long run, and I would buy a pack of M&M or no Skittles from like the little bodega outside of the park. And throughout the run, I would just have like a couple Skittles, and kind of just like pace it like that. Mentally, like psychologically great because it you were like looking forward to those little hits of sugar and candy. But in my mind, it was like the goo basically is this. It's just a bunch of fructose and glucose. So,
I would
kind of
say,
the similar thing.
yeah, I would say, it's, there's more, I'm sure the goo people would be like, the goo company would be like, we're more
There's
than
more to it than
Skittles.
that. Yes.
We're more than Skittles. But yes, I mean, when we're looking at, Skittles might be something sucrose, probably, I'm guessing, is what's in Skittles, just straight table sugar. Whereas fructose is the carb source for the goos, a little slower digested, um, a little lower glycemic, I guess we would say, on the goos. But I can't say that, if someone was like, hey, I'm on a budget, or this is what's here, this is what's available, or God bless if someone just loves Skittles and they're like, so I run. I run while I feed them to myself. That's not what we're encouraging. You do not need to. If you want to indulge in your Skittles, we can find a way for you just to have your Skittles. You don't have to go running a marathon in order to.
You don't have to run to have your Skittles.
Right.
Yeah,
Um, Something that came to mind actually, and I think this was our very first interview together, was I found it really entertaining, the concept of potatoes, and we saw that this
I
research
knew you were going to say that.
research was like funded by the potato industry, I believe,
Yeah.
about the carbohydrates in potatoes being an optimal fuel source, which is, yes, I mean, true. But they had studied basically what we're talking about of goo, these sweet kind of packets that you squeeze into your mouth, but it was potato starch like that.
Yeah.
That was potato
Exactly.
puree that people were consuming during endurance events. I was like, that sounds horrible.
And messy.
And messy. You're right. Because like, in what kind of packet were they? They probably weren't in the fancy little packets like the goos or the other energy gels. Maybe they were like out of a Ziploc. Although, we were saying like if someone gets like tired of the sweet, sweet, sweet of the goos, maybe they would want to make like a little savory potato puree.
Yeah.
Now I'm picturing people with like syringes filled, like oversized syringes filled with like savory potato puree, and that's like their alternative to their goos. You're welcome. Anybody who just heard that and you're training for the marathon and you take that. Okay, on the goos, back to that. Tell me about the caffeine, because I have like more kind of like GI issues, and I'll realize that, certain things I'm sensitive to that maybe I didn't know, but wow, I did some caffeinated goos at one point for a race, and I think I had to stop along the race route like a dozen times. It was awful. So some of the goos
Yeah.
are caffeinated, some aren't.
Yeah, they come in like all different amounts, which is kind of cool because then you can really customize. And now that I've learned a lot more about like what is 50 milligrams of caffeine,
Right.
what is 100 milligrams, I've kind of started to customize. So I'll get a couple different ones and
Yeah.
like strategize where on the course I'm going to have the different amounts of caffeine. But for a while, I was using the 100 milligram goos. And during a marathon, I think I bring 4 gels, but usually just use 3, and was having 3 like 100 milligram of caffeine gels.
So
That's
each
300
is
milligrams.
like a full cup of coffee,
Each is
basically.
100. A full cup of coffee. Exactly. So like a cup of coffee, I think it's like about what, 80 to 100 milligrams is in a cup
Right.
of coffee. So this was like 3 cups of coffee on top of whatever caffeine I had before my run. And then afterwards, it's like, oh, let me have a cup of coffee. I luckily was not experiencing any negative side effects like digestively or otherwise. My theory was that maybe because I was running,
Right.
I was processing it quicker than if I was just like sitting here in my living room. It
Revved
might,
up.
give me heart palpitations or
Right.
something to have that much caffeine. Um, but now that I understand how much it is, I will bring 100 milligram gel, and then I'll get one that's like maybe a 25 or something like that, and maybe I'll have the 25 at like mile 4, 5, and then the next one make that kind of like the big one when you're like really starting to struggle.
To kind of just
So
give you that little extra edge. And we know when we're talking about, the science of caffeine and performance fueling, there is a benefit, what would be called like an ergogenic benefit or a performance benefit to adding that caffeine strategically like you do. So I think that makes a lot of sense of kind of going that lower dose and that first third of it, and then going with a little
yeah.
heftier dose, kind of like to get you over that hump for it. Talk to me about during that training leading up to it, because there's so much misconception about carb loading, like, I mean, back in the 70s, or maybe not 70s as much. I guess that marathons were starting to get, more popular then, but 70s, 80s, even into the 90s, it was like, oh, I need a carbohydrate load. And, the recommendation would be to significantly taper your exercise the entire week, really leading up to the event. So go really hard in your training and almost like deplete yourself, and then really taper it down to where you did very little as it got closer. And then at the same time, really ramp up your carbohydrate intake. And the idea was that it would almost like super saturate our muscles' glycogen stores. Glycogen is that carbohydrate stored in our muscles. But we're realizing that's not really the case, that that's not necessary.
Yeah, I definitely used to consume a lot more carbs because I thought I needed to for all the reasons that you just mentioned, especially around a long run. I do think, going, and I would love to hear kind of your like specific recommendations around this. But, adding a little bit more carb in the days leading up the night before, and then, getting some carbs in your system race morning, definitely important. But I think it's more of like an incremental increase and not like the classic, like giant bowl of pasta,
Right.
leading up to race day and all of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's one of these where, when we talk about like how much carbs are in typical foods, like a typical slice of grainy bread may have like 15 or 20 grams of carbs, and a half of a cup of rice or pasta or potatoes, sweet potatoes, even if it's the, brown rice or sweet potatoes, is also about 15 or 20 grams of carbs. And a half of a cup, I like to use the example that that's what fits into a cupcake wrapper. And so it's really not a lot. And so if someone has a big old bowl of pasta, that might be 5 cups of pasta, which could be the equivalent of 10 cups of bread, for example. I mean, 10 slices of bread. And so, yes, the equivalent of, 30, 40, 60 grams of carbohydrate, even, which might be the equivalent of, 2 to 4 slices of bread, depending on someone's size, how they're normally eating. If you're normally not eating much starch at all and you're not a tall or broad person, then 30 grams of carbs at a time throughout might be sufficient, maybe 45 or 60 for others. And looking at how often you're going to, put that through the day, I would say though, a lot of people have certain things that they may really enjoy. It might be, freshly made pasta, or it might be pizza. And it may be something that those aren't things that they're normally putting into their normal repertoire of food, because they want to do things like more vegetables or fish or things like this. And it is the time that, yeah, go ahead and treat yourself with those, but realizing that it might be a lot less than like what we thought. And then
Yeah.
if you did have, that pasta, then we probably don't also need the bread, the dessert, the extras, so sort of choosing like maybe it's that one source of a carbohydrate or a starch that is really enjoyable to you. And that's really your favorite. And that's what you're choosing and using to get that extra little dose of carbs in the days leading up. But I definitely think in the 3, 4 days leading up to it, for our listeners, take that opportunity to not just in the evenings, but throughout the day, kind of bump up that carbohydrate intake, every 3, 4 hours through. It doesn't have to just be this stark shooting line up of carbs and a sharp cutoff of exercise.
Totally. And so for me, how that kind of looked would be like little swaps. Like I would get a salad at Chopped in New York City most days of the week for my lunch. During the time I was doing a lot of these marathons, they had an option to put it in a wrap. So the day before a long run, I would get the salad inside the
Right.
wrap to like up my carbs a little bit.
Right.
Something else all my friends know about pizza and wine Fridays. During marathon training on Friday nights, I would have a long run planned for Saturday. They'd all be out to dinner or whatever kind of social event, and I would have to sit out. You do give up a little bit of your social life if you're training for something like this. But I would order pizza and have like one glass of wine, because I found for me, everyone's different, but for me, it was enough to really enjoy it, but I didn't feel like it took away from like my sleep or my performance if I had it kind of early enough in the evening. And then the pizza part, like, yes, definitely I was getting the carbs, and also just something kind of psychologically to look forward to. And I love those kind of rituals and things like that too.
And it is sort of like it's exactly as you said, it's a ritual and it's a fun part of you're putting your body through these things that they're challenging. They're maybe even like painful at times. They're hard. Sometimes it's hard to get up in that morning and do that run. And so to have those things, there's always the conversation of, do you use food as a reward or all these things? And in this moment, I would say, heck yeah. Like at that point, yes,
Yeah,
you're about to do a marathon. You've been doing these long training runs. You're putting your body through a lot of challenge. You're using the carbohydrate up out of your muscles and beyond. And so we do want to put it in there. And while would we love it if it was all whole grains and all these other things that you're choosing throughout the week to like very selectively and nutritiously top off your carbohydrate stores? Yeah, but if it's me personally, I'm going to go for that good sourdough bread dipped in olive oil, or I would love that pizza. Things that you also really enjoy. The key
yeah,
though, I think, is to be aware that it's not it's not just the excuse to say anything goes, because
totally.
there's a lot of people who will say, "Boy, I was like training for a marathon and I gained weight," and they're stunned. Have you heard that a lot?
Yeah. No, I hear that all the time. And I think part of it is like you are hungrier. Like I
Right.
think you absolutely like you're burning all this energy, like you are hungrier. But I think it's more of like a mindset thing. And like you do get into that kind of like reward mentality of like,
Yeah.
oh, I ran 15 miles today. So instead of just being like, I'm gonna have this like great pizza dinner because I earned it, which is awesome, it becomes I'm going to have this like giant lunch that I wouldn't normally have, and the pizza and cake and ice cream. And you end up, you know, taking that mentality into like every
Right.
like meal and snack opportunity. So I think it's like, you do need more food if you're training like this, like certainly, but I feel like it's that similar, and I'd love your advice and input here, but I try to follow like the 80/20
Yeah.
rule kind of generally, and 80% of the time I'm trying to eat really nutritionally and my lean meats, my healthy carbohydrates and all that good stuff, and then 20% of the time letting myself have mindful indulgences. I feel like with marathon training, I try to maintain that ratio, but it's just like a little bit more like volume, like across the board. Not a huge amount extra though, but just enough to compensate for the extra activity.
I agree 100% with that approach. I would also say for people, when you know what that 20% is, and as Caitlin said, sort of those mindful indulgences that are things that you really enjoy, you look forward to. And so you're going to add that in, like your pizza before your race day. I also would just definitely encourage you not to be apologetic about it. Sometimes I think, and, speaking to women especially, there's the, oh, well, I ran, whatever. So I'm going to have it, or making excuses. No, just have it. Whenever I
Yeah,
mentioned like that good bread or pizza or whatever. I mean, people will comment like, really, you eat that? Like, I'm surprised. Like, you're a dietitian, you eat that. And I'm thinking, I would be so upset if I didn't have it because it's really delicious and we love it.
absolutely.
So I love the 80/20 approach with the focus on mostly what we do are these kind of purposeful, intentional, mindful choices that are fueling and nourishing our body well. And then the other is things that can still give us benefit. They're still giving us the carbohydrate, they're still giving us the fuel, and they bring so much enjoyment to us.
Yeah,
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 100%. And again, these are things that we would want to live this way always. And doing something like training for a marathon isn't that we're saying, oh, well, then that makes it okay to have that 20%. It just, like you said, that 20% might even just be a little bit more, a little bigger, or maybe like you're doing,
exactly.
yeah, it's just a little bit more specific in that. So you shared like the pizza and wine night before. And again, you said specifically one glass of wine, not more. And when we talked earlier, you said that if it was a race that you were really looking at time and performance, then you would forego even just that one glass of wine.
Yeah, exactly. My parents have been with me to a lot of these races, and we were out at a pizza place before a marathon, and my mom got a glass of wine. I remember she was like, "Oh, this is so
Mm.
delicious," and I was like, "Do you have to rub that in my face because every little small thing you're trying to really optimize if you're trying to get a PR or just really perform well on race day." So just trying to set yourself up for all the things that you can control. So you can't control the weather. Your training's in the bank at that time, so you can't do anything else to, improve that aspect. But the one thing you can control is what you eat the night before, what you drink the night before. That impacts your sleep. And then, of course, what you eat when you wake up in the morning.
Talk to us about that. What's some of like your favorite, morning of meals or snacks on race day?
Yeah. So typically on morning before morning workouts these days, I will just stay fasted and just have some caffeine. But before a long run or on race day, I I've come to like those RX bars. Again, it's not similar to the goos. It's not a bar that I would eat really any other time besides before a long run because they do have a lot of they it's all natural sugars in the
Right.
RX bars, but it is still sugar, and I wouldn't eat it unless I was really putting it to use, or like we talked about earlier, if it was a mindful indulgence
Right.
and something of that nature. But they're
And you
about
mentioned like
200 calories.
some of the races
Yeah,
where you have to get there so early, something like the bar is portable that you could also bring with you and have out there. And that almost served as like your
yeah,
pre-race fuel source.
and so before a run like the New York City Marathon, for example, you get up at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and you don't start running until like 11. So I would wake up and have like a bowl of oats with like wild blueberries, like frozen, just throw them in with the oats with some water in the microwave. Just have like a good bowl of oatmeal just to kind of like get something digesting through your system. I would know I had several hours to digest it. And then while I mentioned New York City Marathon, you're sitting in this field that's usually freezing in Staten Island for several hours. Something like an RX bar would be good to just like top off your
Yes.
energy before you actually head out.
Some of my favorite, pre breakfast or kind of pre run fuel sources before longer training runs or before a race day would be something like whole grain bread with like almond butter. Also, people who like toaster waffles or something like that can be a good source, and having something like, again, the almond butter on there. One thing that I do like is even adding like a little bit of sea salt to something like that. It helps to, it's just like one more way to add electrolytes in through our food before, along with that fuel source. But looking, Caitlin mentioned oatmeal. And so having something like that is going to give that the carbohydrates, some whole grains, that fiber, but then also a little bit of protein in that. Is there any like breakfast that people have shared with you that you're like, that's bizarre? Like that's a strange thing?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I had one guy, he used to like add, he would salt tomato slices. So whatever he was eating as like his pre-run fuel source, it could be like cheese toast, or it could have been like, a whole grain bagel with like a nut butter. But he would always add sliced tomatoes with salt sprinkled over them.
I mean, sounds good.
It sounds good. I know. But I don't know about, yeah, I guess early in the morning, like it was a way that he was like, found it appealing to also like get that extra salt. Yeah. So I think essentially for just our listeners thinking before you're going to be out there, like we said earlier, some of the things that you're going to be able to carry like on your person, like in your little zipper pouches, or like Caitlin has her spy belt, you'll have just the goos or these kind of things. So as much as you can get something that's real food that feels sustaining and digest well. The other real big key, of course, is not to do anything new on race day. Use your training runs to try this. If you have one bad experience during a training run, after adding a new food, you'll get it completely. You'll be like, okay, I'm so glad this wasn't the real event. Thinking though, for our listeners, like what's a carbohydrate source that digests well for you? For Caitlin, it's oatmeal. For me, it would be like a whole grain bread, a seedy bread even worked well with like almond butter. What's something that's that carbohydrate source and then some protein, also some fat? It could be a grilled cheese sandwich. That could work for you. And that would also give you that protein, that fat, the sodium and that cheese. So just thinking of like what's something that's going to be real food, ideally that you can have in that meal pre-run, because it may be a while before you're having that real food again and you're kind of relying on some of those supplements a lot through the run. And then what's one of your favorite like post-run, post-race recovery meals?
Two, actually. If I'm out, I will do a bagel with avocado and egg whites, like an everything bagel toasted with avocado and egg whites, and
And
a
of
big cup of
course,
coffee.
you're in Manhattan, so it's like real bagels and quality bagels.
The best bagels. There's a place to pick a bagel right by Central Park that a running buddy and I used to frequent quite a bit. If I'm coming home, then I'll do eggs, like an omelet with some spinach, and then oatmeal. I really like oatmeal. Sometimes we even eat oatmeal as like a carb with whatever protein we're having for
Yeah.
dinner.
Yeah.
So bowl of oatmeal with an omelet and some spinach and like maybe a slice of avocado
Yeah.
and definitely some coffee in there as like a favorite recovery meal.
And looking at that recovery of being, again, sort of like our pre workout fueling is that blend of carbohydrates, protein, some fat to slow that digestion so it holds you, but not so much that it could cause GI upset. So looking at, I love to have a meal that isn't fat free, but has some fat in it before. And then after, looking at how are you going to get those carbs, including that source of protein with it, is going to help with recovery. We look at a ratio of like 4-to-1 carb to protein. I would say, even just to our listeners, if you're just getting started, don't get hung up on all of that. Just what are you eating before that's going to give you some carbs and protein? What are you going to eat during that's going to give you fast digested carbs, which is usually going to be more sugary carbs? And then also, what's going to be your electrolytes? Y'all heard me saying to Caitlin, oh my gosh, wait, I can't believe you were just doing water. We could do something like the saltier versions of goo or the salted Cliff blocks by the little margarita blocks
Or the
that are,
noon
or the
tablet.
noon, adding those tablets to your water. So, how am I going to get carbs and protein before? How am I going to get those fast digested, more sugary carbs and some electrolytes during, along with my hydration? And then, what am I going to do for carbs and that source of protein after? And we can really keep it basic at that. And if you're looking at training for this and you want to take it to the next level, reach out, find a registered dietitian. I'm going to put the link in our episode notes to find a dietitian in your region, specifically a sports dietitian. And then, Caitlin, you've covered so much on running and performance fueling that we're going to put links to a bunch of the different pieces that you've written in the show notes of the episode too.
Awesome. That'd be great. Yeah, I have specifically one that you and I worked on a while back for women's running, what
Cool.
to eat before a run, and then some other links I'll include as well.
Okay, cool. Tell me about also the Paceline Fit app.
Yeah, so this is kind of a way to get some good rewards for any gear that you're going to be buying and also groceries. It's also a really amazing motivator. So if you're someone that thinks that training for a marathon might be on the horizon, but maybe you have trouble getting motivated to keep up with an exercise routine, it's an app called Paceline. Essentially, you link it with your wearables. That could be Apple Watch, Fitbit, Garmin are the three that it works with. It tracks your elevated heart rate activity. So, like Molly was saying, tons of great benefits simply for walking. A brisk walk elevates your heart rate enough to get quote unquote credit. When you get 150 minutes of elevated heart rate in the week, like 21 minutes a day, it comes down to, you'll get free rewards in the app. And that can be anything from like Liquid IV is an electrolyte brand. There's like a free 3-pack on there right now. Sometimes it's discounts to really cool fitness brands like Hyperice or Lala. Dollar Amazon gift cards are on there. So just kind of a cool way to keep yourself motivated. And now they have a credit card. It's called the Paceline card. It's through Visa. And I have it myself. You get up to 5% cash back on health and wellness purchases. So that's your running sneakers. My
That's
favorite
cool.
are Adidas. The 5% cash back also counts for groceries like Whole Foods,
That's
Trader Joe's, places
cool.
like that. And the way that you get that amount of cash back is by logging that amount of exercise. So
Wow.
normally you'd get 2.5%. If you log the exercise, it doubles it to 5%. So
Wow. That's
anyway, just
really
a cool
cool.
little
Yeah.
hack for runners out there.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's very, very cool. And then tell me what is next on your marathon horizon.
So there's another kind of a marathon club, you would call it. It's called the Seven Continents Club. And basically, it's running a marathon on every continent, including
Wow.
Antarctica.
Oh my God.
So, and you do have a little more choice here rather than the marathon majors are super specific. This is just like any marathon on the seven
That's
continents
cool.
will get you in. So yeah, I'm looking at maybe Cape Town in South Africa,
Oh,
potentially like
wow.
this time next year as the next one. And we'll need to get one in Australia or New Zealand. South America is still on my list. And then probably would save Antarctica for last. I've heard that's more like a really cold, snowy hike. So
I don't know. Depends on how long this takes you. Maybe better to start with that one.
That's true. It's true.
Like as you're like,
Delayed gratification.
right. Or like how many years in is it going to take you to do all 7 continents? Maybe, but like maybe keep it while you're in your 30s on doing that one. That's really cool. Thank you so much for your time on this. I think it's just one of those, like, I think that you're like a perfect person for this because you have a lot of knowledge on it. You've interviewed, you've written on the topic forever. We have links to a bunch of these. You also have experienced it as the everyday consumer getting into it. It was someone like you've gone through everything and all the different phases of the journey that anyone listening will be or would go through if they started this themselves. So I think it's just really good to hear from your perspective and the things that work from you. And then also, I think not overcomplicating it, keeping it simple. Well,
Yeah,
sweet.
it's so true. I think it's a lot more it's a lot simpler than I think a lot of people think, training for a marathon and being able to cross that finish line. So definitely would encourage anyone considering it to, really start looking into which one you'd want to do.
Well, sweet. Thank you so much for your time and your inspiration, Caitlin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Molly. This has been so fun, and thanks for having me.
I always enjoy my conversations, my interviews with Caitlin. So I'm excited to have had the opportunity to flip the script, turn the tables, and actually talk with her, feature her and her story. I hope that hearing her journey from, having such a challenge to even run a single mile to having done 10 marathons, 6 majors, to me, that's so inspiring. She is an everyday person who has had these struggles and just kind of put her mind to it and really has succeeded in this space. Also, hearing that fueling for this type of training doesn't have to be that complicated. Making sure you're getting your carbs before, during, after. We talked about how to strategically pair them with proteins, especially before, during, figuring out what's going to be that source of carb that's going to be fast digested, easy on your stomach, easy on your system. That's really the main thing, is how can you fuel optimally? What's going to sit well with you? What are foods that you like enough that you enjoy, that during these long extended training runs, you don't mind continuing to reach for these things? They're portable, they're easy. So that's, really kind of the more challenging part, is that trial and error of finding what works for you. As we said, never trying anything new on race day, using those training runs as they get longer and longer to start experimenting with what's your carb source going to be, what's your hydration, that electrolyte rich hydration source going to be. So also, Caitlin mentioned several different articles that she's written about performance fueling and marathon training. And so I'm going to link to those in the show notes of this episode. And always let me know what you think. If you're hearing this, if it kind of plants that seed, you start training for that longer event, always reach out to me. I want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.